I didn't flinch when she said it. Nobody cares what you think anymore. Just stood there, dish towel in my hand, heart thudding against silence. The lasagna I made was still bubbling on the counter, untouched. My daughter topped off her husband's wine, never looking up. My son laughed too hard at a joke I hadn't heard. I had been at every school play, every ER visit, every impossible parent-teacher conference. But tonight, in my own home, I was an afterthought with a pulse. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The sun hit the side of Heather's craftsman-style home like it was trying too hard. Warm, showy, almost smug. The kind of October Sunday that dressed up like summer. All golden leaves on the lawn and crisp air that made you feel like life should be better than it is. Marilyn adjusted her sunglasses and stepped out of her Prius, the engine ticking as it cooled. She could already hear laughter through the open kitchen window, the fake kind that stretches too wide, holds just a bit too long. Inside, the house smelled like maple sausage and mimosas. Casey greeted her with a quick hug, tight but brief, as if there was a timer on familial affection now. She wore athleisure and a smile she hadn't inherited from Marilyn. "Hey, Mom, you look nice." "You always say that when I'm wearing black," Marilyn said, with a small smile. She followed her daughter into the dining room, heels quiet against the hardwood. The table was set like a Pottery Barn ad. Layered linen, mismatched ceramic mugs. A serving tray of avocado toast with microgreens on top. Heather's doing, no doubt. Heather herself stood by the espresso machine, all manicured nails and passive-aggressive posture. Neil was already at the head of the table, flipping through something on his phone. His hair was grayer now, so was the beard, but his voice was still that careful mix of confident and distant. When he looked up, his eyes barely paused on Marilyn. "Morning," he said. Marilyn sat. She nodded. Morning. For a while, there was nothing but the quiet clink of silverware and small talk about home values, Casey's spin class, and how Heather's contractor had flaked on the deck again. It was all familiar, all choreographed. Everyone playing the part they thought would earn applause from the ghost of some better version of this family. Then came the story. Heather, always the one to steer the conversation when it suited her, launched into an anecdote from Neil's childhood, something about the neighbor's dog, a fire hydrant, and a box of fireworks Neil had ingeniously rigged at age 10. Everyone chuckled, waiting for Neil to confirm or embellish. "That wasn't the Hendersons' dog," Marilyn said softly. "That was the year we lived on Lorimer. The dog's name was Lucky." A pause, barely a beat. Heather didn't look up from her plate when she said, "Nobody cares what you think anymore, Marilyn." It landed like a glass shattering at a funeral. Neil stared at his plate. Not a flicker of disagreement, not even a sigh. Casey blinked twice and mouthed across the table, "Sorry." Marilyn didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup, the porcelain warm and grounding in her palm. She took a slow sip, eyes steady on Heather. The silence held. Then Heather laughed, a little too loudly, and pushed back her chair. "Anyway," she said, rising, "I'll grab the scones." Marilyn watched her walk into the kitchen, that confident sway of someone who believed the battle was already over. She looked at Neil next, but his eyes had retreated behind the familiar curtain of cowardice. She took another sip of her coffee, letting the bitterness sit on her tongue. Heather thought that would be the end of it. Just another dig buried under casual conversation. Just another correction erased by volume and bravado. But Heather had never been good at reading silence. Marilyn placed the empty mug down gently. Her eyes were steady now, cold in a way they hadn't been for years. Across the table, Casey looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Marilyn didn't need her to, because that was the moment, quiet and sharp, when the decision finally made itself. She was done swallowing, and she already knew exactly where she'd start. Marilyn slid the last Tupperware of leftover scones into the fridge and shut the door with a quiet finality. The house had emptied hours ago, but the silence clung like a second skin. She leaned against the counter, listening to the ticking of the wall clock and the low hum of the dishwasher, finishing a cycle that didn't need to run. The air still smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and something saccharine she couldn't place, probably Heather's perfume. She pulled her phone from her purse hesitated, then set it down. No messages. No one had followed up. Not even Casey. Fine. Marilyn moved to the hallway closet, slid aside a row of old coats, and pressed her hand to the narrow panel of drywall in the back. It gave with a soft click, revealing a shallow recess. Inside sat 3 banker's boxes, neatly labeled in her handwriting, years 110, 1120, 21 retirement. She carried the top box into the living room and set it gently on the coffee table, brushing off a thin layer of dust. The living room had always been her space. Neutral grays, clean lines, books stacked with spines inward. Order, control. The only things she'd ever trusted to stay. Marilyn opened the box and pulled out a binder with a cracked navy spine. Zoning Conflicts, 2003-2006. Inside, copies of city council minutes, building permit scans, photos of half-finished commercial developments that never passed inspection. Her notes were tucked between pages, margins filled with looping, cursive, small stars beside names she hadn't said aloud in years. She flipped to a folder marked Sullivan Redevelopment Project. Headlines clipped from the Daily Examiner were stapled to typed memos. A post-it note still clung to one margin. Heather pushed hard for variance. Marilyn stared at the handwriting, hers, but sharper then, more certain. Next binder, Public Works, citizen complaints. Water damage surveys, whistleblower letters that had come through anonymous channels. All documented, all time-stamped. Every paper told a story someone had hoped would get lost in the shuffle. But Marilyn had never been good at forgetting. The front door creaked open without a knock. "Back here," Marilyn called without looking up. Lorna stepped into the living room, holding 2 coffees from Beans and Kopfars and wearing a denim jacket covered in election pins. "Your Prius wasn't in the driveway. I parked on the street." "Something happen?" Lorna handed her a cup, paused when she saw the table. "Jesus, what is all this?" "My life," Marilyn said, calmly. "In 3 boxes. Lorna tilted her head. "You kept all of it?" Marilyn flipped a page and pointed to a familiar name, one that still showed up on town signage and real estate postcards. "You remember the Allerton rezoning?" "Sure," Lorna said. "Half the town does. Heather's dad made a fortune flipping those properties. What's this?" Marilyn passed her the file. Lorna scanned it, eyebrows lifting as the subtext started to speak. "These go back decades." "I was the city clerk," Marilyn said. "I didn't have power, but I had eyes." "And a memory like a bear trap," Lorna added softly. Marilyn closed the binder. She said, "No one cares what I think." Lorna looked at her, eyebrows knitting. "And you think someone will?" "I think someone should," Marilyn replied. Her voice was even, but the undercurrent ran sharp as a snapped wire. She stood, walked to the hallway, and pulled out the second box. "You're not just keeping these for nostalgia, are you?" Lorna asked, more quietly now. Marilyn didn't answer. She opened the next binder. The name Macmillan Fund Disbursement glared back in red ink, cross-referenced with Heather's early campaign donors. From somewhere down the street, a lawnmower buzzed to life. The sound felt wrong. Ordinary. Marilyn's eyes moved across the page, her finger tracing the initials of someone she hadn't seen in 15 years. Someone who might have more to lose now than they ever did back then. Her hand hovered over a file tab, labeled Closed Cases, Incomplete. She pulled it slowly. Inside, one document sat alone, a faded complaint form signed by a man who disappeared just after the final vote. "I think it's time," Marilyn said, her voice almost a whisper now. Lorna's brow furrowed. "Time for what?" Marilyn met her eyes for the first time. "To let them remember what they buried," she said, "and who helped them dig." It had been years since Marilyn had opened her laptop for anything but bill payments and the occasional Zillow spiral she never admitted to. But now, the cursor blinked at her like it knew better than to rush her. The screen displayed a simple application. Voices of Civic Memory, Local Histories Oral Archive Project, State Library System. She leaned back in the chair, rolling her pen between her fingers. The air was cooler today, light rain tapping against the window pane like it was trying to remind her that fall hadn't given up yet. Her reading glasses slid down her nose as she stared at the prompt. Briefly describe your role in municipal government and why your contribution matters. She let the question sit for a minute, then typed, I served as city clerk in a mid-sized town for over 30 years. I was not elected. I was not quoted. But I documented every decision, tracked every exception, and cross-referenced every temporary approval that somehow became permanent. I kept what others discarded. I remembered what no one thought would matter, until it did. She attached the PDF she'd created the night before, a clean, itemized index of her archive, organized by year, subject, and impact level. At the bottom, she included her phone number, her availability, and nothing more. Then she clicked submit. She didn't call Lorna, didn't mention it to Casey. She didn't even let herself reread it. The send-off felt sacred, like sealing a letter and lighting the match behind it. The email reply came 2 days later at 6:12 a.m. Subject, Oral Archive Submission, Marilyn R. Dear Ms. R. This is remarkable. The level of documentation and personal insight is beyond anything we've received this cycle. We would be honored to include your voice in our collection. We'd like to begin with a formal interview and a series of recorded story sessions. Could you begin taping in 2 weeks? Marilyn reread it 3 times, then marked it unread. She stood and walked into the living room, where her binders were now spread out across the floor in a growing sea of manila folders and post-it flags. The chaos made sense to her. It was the beginning of something, deliberate disorder on the verge of becoming narrative. She dragged the coffee table aside and cleared space on the floor, using different colored index cards to start sketching arcs: housing reform, flood planning failures, municipal equity, and misuse. The themes emerged like oil rising in water. Each section got its own row. Each row got its own timeline. She wrote names, circled them, drew lines between them like a crime board in a detective show. Except everything here had already happened. Everything here had been real. You're not just a record keeper, Lorna said from the hallway. She had let herself in again, holding 2 grocery bags this time. You're the proof. Marilyn didn't look up from where she sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a folder labeled Quiet Settlements, 2011 to 2017. That's exactly what I want to be. Lorna set the bags down slowly. So this interview, are you nervous? No, Marilyn said. I've waited too long for nervous. What I feel now is ready. The 2 women stood in silence for a moment, the way some people stand at the edge of water before jumping in, not because they're afraid, but because they respect what comes next. Then Marilyn opened a folder she'd left untouched for years. The tab read, Whitmore Bridge Approval, Expedited Bypass Process. Her hands moved slower this time, fingertips brushing the signatures at the bottom. The first was Neil's. The second she hadn't expected to see again. It was Heather's, dated years before her official campaign ever began. Her breath caught. How far do you think this goes? Lorna asked quietly. Marilyn didn't answer right away. Her eyes narrowed as she flipped to the back of the file, where an envelope had been taped shut. Her own handwriting on the front read, If they ever pretend to forget. She peeled the flap open, and what slid out changed the room. The document from the envelope still sat between them, its edges curled slightly like it had waited too long to be seen. Neither Marilyn nor Lorna had said much since she'd pulled it out. The silence was less shock now, more recalibration, like the rules of gravity had shifted and they were learning to walk again. Marilyn slid the paper back into its sleeve and sealed the folder shut with a piece of masking tape. She didn't label it, not yet. Lorna reached for her tea, hands quieter than usual. You sure you want to keep this going? Marilyn's answer came in the form of a slow nod, her face calm, unreadable. This doesn't go away because I do. Her phone buzzed. They both looked at it. Screen up. Caller ID, Neil H. Marilyn stared for half a beat too long. Then she pressed speaker and set the phone down on the dining table. Hello? Her voice was neutral, stripped of anything he could weaponize. A pause. Then Neil's voice, cautious and measured. Hey Marilyn. Lorna raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Marilyn said, You called me. You can start. Neil cleared his throat. Right, Heather and I were talking. She's a little concerned. About you? She said you've been doing things with old paperwork, digging through stuff? I see, Marilyn said, folding her hands. Her tone gave him nothing. Did she ask you to call me? No, But his hesitation was too loud. She's just worried, that's all. About records I created and legally retained? Another pause. A rustling noise on his end. Fabric shifting, someone whispering near him. Lorna leaned in, her lips pressed tight. Then Neil again, less smooth now. She just thinks maybe you're stirring things up that don't need to be stirred. Marilyn exhaled slowly, as if bored. You're welcome to come read them yourself if you'd like. Read what? The papers you're so worried about. The ones you've apparently never read. You were the one signing half of them. Lorna looked sideways at her, impressed. Neil's voice dipped into something familiar, his version of soothing. Marilyn, no one's trying to make this adversarial. We just don't understand why you're... You don't need to understand, Marilyn interrupted, cool and deliberate. You just need to accept that it's mine. Silence on the line. She could hear it again, the faint shuffle of breath too close to the phone. Heather, still trying to control the conversation without risking her voice. Marilyn smiled slightly. It didn't reach her eyes. Is she there with you? She asked. No answer. She is, Marilyn said, more to Lorna than to Neil. Tell her she should be careful what she forgets. I didn't. She ended the call. The screen blinked back to the home screen. A photo of her and Casey from a Labor Day in Michigan years ago, back when Neil still took pictures of things other than property. Lorna sat down across from her. Well, that'll wake them up. They've been awake, Marilyn said. They just never thought I'd speak. Her hand moved to the folder again, tapping her fingers against the tape-sealed edge. The weight of the years inside it wasn't heavy anymore. It felt sharp, directional. What's next? Lorna asked. Marilyn stood and walked to the window. Outside, the town looked the same. Quiet streets, aging sidewalks. But under it all, the fractures had always been there. Now she could finally hear them creaking. I think it's time I gave someone else a call, she said. She reached for the envelope marked State Journal, Editor's Desk. Address already filled in, just waiting on a stamp. The radio crackled faintly over the kitchen speaker, its volume set just high enough to fill the house, but low enough that Marilyn could hear her own breath. She stood at the counter, slicing an orange with practiced precision. Each wedge dropped into a glass bowl, its citrus brightness oddly fitting for what she was about to hear. Then came the host's voice, warm, professional, curious. Today, in honor of Civic Memory Month, we bring you the story of a woman whose decades-long work shaped the town most of us take for granted. She was never on a ballot, never in a headline, and yet, every sidewalk you've walked, every park you've sat in, every home protected from flood risk bears her imprint. Her name is Marilyn Rowe. The orange knife paused mid-air. Across the kitchen, Lorna sat frozen, a mug of chamomile halfway to her lips, and then Marilyn's voice, calm, clear, recorded weeks earlier in a windowless room at the State Library, but somehow more alive now. She didn't sound nostalgic. She sounded like someone explaining how a building stands without ever mentioning the steel inside. The trick to civic change is watching what gets erased, not what's built, not what's announced, what disappears. That's where the real story is. The segment cut to her talking about zoning loopholes that allowed floodplain development in '94, about the emergency permit she blocked in 2002 that would have leveled a restored wetland for a car dealership, the time she ghost-wrote the approval language for the historic district, ensuring the row of brownstones couldn't be demolished just because someone wanted more visibility from the bypass. None of it accusatory. All of it undeniable. The show ended with the host saying, in her own quiet way, Marilyn Rowe left fingerprints on the very structure of this town. And now, finally, we get to hear her voice. Lorna turned the radio off slowly. Damn. Marilyn said nothing. She just kept slicing oranges. One, then another. Precision, not urgency. Her phone buzzed. Heather, I didn't know you did all that. Marilyn stared at the screen, the blinking cursor in the message reply box. Then she typed, You never asked. She hit send and dropped the phone face down on the counter like it had never mattered. Lorna leaned back in her chair. She's listening. Not because she wants to, Marilyn said, because she has to. The radio segment re-aired 3 days later, this time during the kickoff of the town's Women's History Month events. It wasn't a main feature, just a filler between longer programs, but it stuck. She knew it had when the cashier at Beckett's Market asked if she was that Marilyn, and again when a jogger paused outside her house, staring like they were trying to match her face to a voice they'd only just heard. On Friday afternoon, a thick envelope slid through her mail slot. No return address, just a handwritten note inside. You should have had a seat at the table a long time ago. Beneath it, a printed letter from Councilmember Nia Hartwell, formal city stationery. Words like quiet force of change and historic impact on community resilience. Marilyn read it once, folded it neatly, placed it between the pages of her municipal equity binder like a bookmark for something that hadn't ended yet. She poured herself a glass of iced tea, sat at the table, and listened to the silence. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like the breath before a name is called. Her phone vibrated again, this time a number she didn't recognize. State area code, government prefix. She stared at it. Let it ring once, twice. Then she picked up. Marilyn Rowe speaking. The flatbed scanner made a soft whir clunk as it finished its pass. Casey reached over to flip the next page in the binder, an old city council memo from 1996, complete with 3 different types of paperclip marks and a coffee stain that looked almost deliberate. Wow, she said, half laughing. Was everyone just yelling in italics back then? Marilyn, sitting across the table in her usual chair, smirked faintly. That one's from the Big Dog Park debate. Casey glanced up. Is that an actual term, or… Oh no, I named it that. Privately. Marilyn pulled the next stack of pages toward her, lining them up to be scanned. The official name was Shared Recreational Green Space Zoning Amendment, but people threatened lawsuits over where their terriers could poop. Casey barked a laugh and dropped her forehead to the table. How are you not writing sitcoms? I was too busy untangling them, Marilyn replied. They'd been at it for 3 hours, digitizing every folder marked archive priority with steady hands and dry wit. Marilyn had been reluctant at first to involve Casey, not because she didn't trust her, but because it had taken her so long to build the archive into something whole. Sacred, but Casey hadn't mocked it, hadn't questioned its value. She showed up on time, asked real questions, and most surprising of all, stayed. On her second visit, she brought her own USB scanner. By the 4th, she was labeling PDFs by policy arc. Okay, Casey said, clicking through a file folder. So for these housing exception memos, do you want me to subfolder by year or by outcome? Outcome, Marilyn said, because intent is a story. Outcome is proof. Casey stopped, looked at her. That's really good. It's just how I think, Marilyn said, smoothing the edges of a stack before passing it over. They kept going like that, hour after hour. In between scanning bursts, they laughed about the petty notes city council members used to slip her, underhanded digs in faux polite cursive, like, please remember whose seat was elected. Casey read them aloud in dramatic voices, turning bureaucratic ego into theater. Marilyn didn't say it aloud, but watching her granddaughter read her world, really read it, softened something she'd braced for impact years ago. At some point, Casey leaned back in her chair, staring at a diagram of a culvert project that had nearly ruined 3 homes. You know, she said softly, everyone always made you sound like background noise. Marilyn looked up. But you weren't background, Casey continued. You were the foundation. Marilyn's fingers paused mid-page. She blinked slowly. After a beat, she stood and went to the small drawer beneath the filing cabinet. She unlocked it with a key she kept on a chain with no other keys. Inside was a thick black folder labeled in fine calligraphy, Private Collection, Restricted Stewardship. She brought it to the table and opened it. Inside were letters, first drafts, recorded conversations from city attorneys, side memos with margin notes no one was ever supposed to see. Things she hadn't even shared with Lorna. Things that were unprocessed. She pulled out a single, blank form, slid it over to Casey, and handed her a pen. What's this? Casey asked. Put your name on the co-steward line, Marilyn said. Casey hesitated. Are you serious? Marilyn nodded. It's not inheritance, it's authorship. You know how to handle it. Casey wrote her name slowly. Marilyn added the date in her own script. Lorna, standing in the doorway with a container of split pea soup she'd brought unannounced, caught the exchange. She didn't interrupt, just watched with an expression that didn't quite smile. You didn't pass the torch, she said after a moment. You handed her the blueprint. Marilyn turned slightly, locking eyes with her. No, she said. I finally gave someone the password. Outside, a horn honked in the distance, short, sharp, like a starting pistol. Casey didn't flinch. Inside the private collection folder, nestled beneath a flap of tissue-thin memos, was a second envelope, one Marilyn hadn't opened since 2005. And now, she wasn't sure it was addressed to her anymore. The knock came too early to pretend it wasn't planned. It was Saturday, 8:06 a.m., the kind of time you chose when you wanted to catch someone before they had a chance to say no. Marilyn opened the door halfway, stopping it with her foot out of habit more than hostility. Heather stood there with a brown paper bakery bag clutched in both hands, her hair pulled back in a ponytail too tight to be casual. I brought almond croissants, she said, from Mercer's. You always liked their... I haven't eaten almond in years, Marilyn said. Heather faltered, but recovered with a brittle laugh. Right, well, I figured we could still try. Marilyn studied her. The performative warmth, the slightly overdressed coat, the practiced vulnerability in her voice. It wasn't cruelty, it was curation. Heather had always been good at managing optics. It just never occurred to her that Marilyn could be the one behind the lens now. Marilyn stepped aside, just far enough to allow her in. Heather looked around the living room, where binders still lay in neat stacks, and a second monitor glowed softly from the dining room table. You've been busy, she said, trying to keep her tone light. I've always been busy, Marilyn replied. You just never asked. Heather flinched, barely perceptible. She placed the bakery bag on the counter, untouched. We were just surprised, that's all. Hearing your voice on the radio like that, seeing your name in the paper. You never told us about all this. You were never listening, Marilyn said, her voice even. You always talked over me. I stopped trying. Heather's mouth parted as if to defend herself, but she let it close again. Her gaze drifted to a nearby binder labeled Early Campaign Variances, Unconfirmed Influence. Her eyebrows lifted. Is this... Yes, Marilyn said. It is. Heather didn't touch it. Instead, she smoothed a hand down the front of her coat, a nervous tell she probably hadn't even noticed developing. I wanted to come by and, I don't know, offer help. Maybe there's something I can do to organize all this, or make sense of it. Marilyn tilted her head. It already makes sense, and it's already being organized. Heather blinked. By who? Marilyn turned slightly toward the hallway, where a second pair of sneakers, scuffed high tops, were visible by the bench. Casey. Heather's face barely shifted, but something behind her eyes did. A split-second calculation. She nodded slowly. I see. Marilyn stepped past her and picked up the unopened bakery bag. You can take these with you. Heather hesitated. Are we really doing this? Drawing lines? I mean, we're family. We were always family, Marilyn said. The difference is now you don't control the room. Heather took the bag and offered a thin smile, polite, composed, hollow. I'll let you get back to whatever this is, she said. Marilyn didn't answer. She simply opened the door again and waited. Heather stepped outside without another word. The door shut with the soft click of a lock sliding back into place. Marilyn stood there for a moment, hand still on the knob. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. What she felt was far rarer, clarity without apology. From down the hallway, Casey appeared in the doorway, still in an oversized hoodie, hair pulled into a loose bun. She really brought croissants. Almond, Marilyn said. Casey made a face. Ugh, I hate almond. Marilyn smiled. Then she walked back to the table, where the restricted stewardship folder still sat open. The second envelope, the one from 2005, had been moved. Not misplaced. Moved. She turned to Casey. Did you open anything in here while I was out yesterday? Casey looked confused. No. Why? Marilyn didn't answer. She just sat down. The envelope was no longer sealed. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish and recycled air. Outside the window, the Capitol dome caught late morning light, its shadow stretching long across the plaza. Marilyn sat at the head of a laminate table that was too big for the 3 people in the room. In front of her sat a contract folder stamped with the embossed seal of the State Historical Archive. She adjusted her glasses and read the top page one more time. Deed of transfer. Personal Civic Records Collection, M. Rowe. granting conditional accession rights to the state archive, pending completion of cataloging and verification. Public access upon donor's death. Look straightforward, said Amira, the young archivist who had first written to her months ago. She had a calm, methodical way of speaking, like someone who handled centuries of paper daily and knew how to keep her heartbeat steady around fragile things. You retain copyright for now, but once it transitions to public domain, your stipulations carry forward. Marilyn pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. This one. It says the metadata tags can be changed. I don't want that. Amira nodded. They won't be. You specified that your name remains attached as originator to every record scanned. I don't mean just attached, Marilyn said. I mean fixed. Amira studied her a moment, then smiled faintly. Understood. Lorna, sitting beside her with a tote bag full of oatmeal cookies she'd smuggled past security, whispered, They're giving your paper trail a forever home. Marilyn signed her name slowly, each letter deliberate. The pen tip scratched slightly, the sound of permanence in motion. The deal was done. 2 weeks later, she was back in the recording room at the State Library. Same chair, same mic, same patient producer with headphones, and a cup of mint tea steaming beside her. The light on the recorder blinked red. We're ready when you are, Ms. Rowe. Marilyn cleared her throat. This segment is called Policy Battles I Wasn't Supposed to Win. Her voice, steady, measured, filled the small room. She spoke about budget hearings where the outcome had been decided before public comment, about how she rewrote resolution language to include environmental review 3 years before anyone realized what that meant for developers, about the time she refused to backdate a signature and got quietly reassigned for it. Her tone never rose. She didn't accuse. She didn't embellish. She told the truth the way some people fold linens, carefully, precisely, with corners aligned. Between takes, Amira peeked through the glass, wide-eyed. You know, she said, no one's ever talked about these moments from inside the system. They weren't supposed to, Marilyn said. That's why I wrote everything down. When they finished the final interview, the producer asked if she wanted to record a short legacy message. A closing statement. Marilyn thought for a long moment, then leaned toward the mic. Paper remembers, she said softly, even when people pretend not to. The following month, her collection went live on the archive's internal index, half redacted, half gleaming with bureaucratic sunlight. It was only accessible to researchers for now, but she knew what public meant. Eventually, someone always opens the door. A reporter from the State Ledger called to request a photo feature. Local women's files rewrite city history. Marilyn declined the camera but offered a quote. I was there. I took notes. That was all they printed. On a quiet Sunday morning, she logged onto the archive portal herself. The digital watermark at the bottom of every scan glowed faintly. Rome Dozo 1, authored, maintained, and verified by M. Rowe. Her name, permanent, irremovable. In the reflection of the monitor, she could see Casey behind her, eating cereal straight from the box, half watching, half proud. You did it, Casey said. Marilyn nodded. No, we did it. From the corner of the screen, a new notification pinged. Access request. External inquiry. Whitmore Bridge correspondence files. Pending review. Her cursor hovered over it. The requester's name appeared in small, plain text. Heather H. Marilyn didn't click it. She simply turned off the monitor. And in the sudden dark reflection, her own face looked back, steady, lit only by the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd written herself into history, and made sure the door behind her would never close again. It was the first Sunday in May, one of those in-between days that couldn't decide whether to be spring or summer. The lilac bush by the porch had just started to bloom, and the air smelled faintly of something clean and temporary. Marilyn was at her kitchen table when she heard tires crunch over the gravel drive. She didn't get up right away. She watched from the window as the silver SUV parked crooked by the mailbox. 3 doors opened. Neil came first, shoulders rounded, hands deep in his pockets, wearing the same windbreaker she used to fold for him before city council meetings. Heather followed, her expression unreadable, one hand resting on the strap of an overlarge tote bag, as though she needed something to hold on to. Casey trailed behind, eyes flicking between them both. Marilyn exhaled once, long and steady, then opened the door before they could knock. Hey, Mom, Neil said. His voice carried the same tone he used when entering a hospital room. Soft, uncertain, already rehearsed. We wanted to check in. You did check in, Marilyn said. The archive logs visitors now. Neil looked momentarily confused. That's not what I meant. She stepped aside anyway, motioning them in. You came this far. Might as well see the rest. They entered the living room. The blinds were half drawn, light striping across the table where 3 open binders lay, each tabbed and color-coded. The top one read, Whitmore Bridge Correspondence, Final Review Copy. Heather's eyes caught on the title. She didn't touch it, but she didn't look away either. Neil cleared his throat. Why didn't you ever tell us you were doing all this? Marilyn rested a hand on the binder. Fingers spread flat like she was steadying something that didn't need steadying. I did, she said. You just never stayed in the room long enough. The words hung there, not sharp, not shouted, just true. Heather's mouth twitched, but she didn't speak. She looked around instead, the scanner still plugged in, the monitors glowing faintly, the framed certificate from the State Archive, leaning against the wall waiting to be hung. Marilyn crossed to the counter and poured water into 4 mismatched glasses. She set them down, 3 across from her, 1 at her side. The gesture wasn't hospitality. It was formality. Casey sat first. Then, reluctantly, Neil. Heather stayed standing, hands tightening around the tote strap. Marilyn opened a folder and spread out a few documents like she was dealing cards. Signatures, dated memos, annotated copies of council votes. Her handwriting threaded through the margins. I was there, she said simply. Every time you spoke about progress, every time you called something resolved. I wrote down what was left out. Neil looked down at the papers, then back at her. We weren't trying to ignore you. I know, she said. You were just comfortable with the silence. Heather's voice was low, almost fragile. You made us look visible, Marilyn interrupted. That's all I ever wanted. To be. The clock ticked once, loud in the pause that followed. Casey stood, breaking the tension like light through a crack. She's not invisible anymore, she said, turning toward her father. Don't ask her to be. Neil nodded faintly, but Heather's eyes stayed on the papers, not angry now, not even defensive. Just cornered by something she could no longer edit. Marilyn gathered the folders again, stacked them neatly, and slid them back into place. Then she looked at the 3 of them, her once family, her audience, her proof, as in said, You can go now. Neil blinked. Just like that? Exactly like that. She walked them to the door. No hugs, no pleasantries. Just the sound of shoes on wood and the faint rustle of paper settling behind her. On the porch, Heather hesitated like she might turn back, but she didn't. When the SUV finally disappeared down the road, Marilyn stayed at the threshold, half inside, half out. The door still open, sunlight stretching across the floorboards toward the table. Casey appeared behind her, quiet. You okay? Marilyn smiled faintly, her eyes still on the light spilling through the doorway. Better than okay, she said. It's finally their turn to listen. She closed the door, not softly this time. And somewhere behind it, the envelope from 2005 lay waiting again. Edges frayed, its seal broken, but its contents still unread. The building was newer than Marilyn expected, red brick with minimalist lines, all glass corners and brushed steel door handles. A sign near the entrance read, Geraldine L. Blake Hall, School of Public Policy and Civic Archives. Below it, a smaller placard had been recently affixed, its adhesive still curing. Casey noticed it first. They already changed the building directory, she whispered. Inside, the atrium was hushed, carpeted in a gray that absorbed sound and nerves alike. A table by the elevator displayed a modest program. Dedication ceremony, M. Rowe Study Room, Archives Division. Next to it, a display case held 3 artifacts under soft light. One of Marilyn's original ledger books, a scanned printout of her Policy Battles I Wasn't Supposed to Win transcript, and a photo of her in profile, head down, flipping through a file. Marilyn stared at it like it belonged to someone else. This doesn't feel like me, she murmured. Lorna, standing beside her in a deep green coat, grinned. Of course it doesn't. You're not used to getting credit. The ceremony wasn't grand. No balloons, no stage lights. Just a circle of 30 or so faculty, local historians, and students, some of whom had clearly been required to attend, but who looked up when Marilyn entered the room marked Research 117. A silver plaque was still covered with a black velvet cloth. Talia, the archive liaison who'd overseen the digitization, stood at the front. She wore simple gold earrings and held a folder with her notes. "We gather here today," she began, "not just to name a room, but to name a history that wasn't always seen." Marilyn Rowe served as a city clerk for over 30 years, but her real title was architect, of accountability, of integrity, of memory. Marilyn stood beside her, hands clasped loosely in front of her, the kind of posture she used to reserve for budget hearings and bad weather. When the time came, Talia gestured gently, and Marilyn stepped forward to help remove the velvet cover. The plaque read, "The Marilyn Rowe Room, dedicated to the record keepers, the silent reformers, and the women who built without being seen." There was a beat of silence, no applause, just reverence. Marilyn stepped to the podium. She didn't use notes. "I'm not used to being in rooms named after me," she said. A soft wave of laughter broke the stillness, respectful and brief. "But I am used to being in rooms no one remembers to name." She paused. "Not all builders wear hard hats. Some carry clipboards." Another silence, this one deeper, fuller. Talia stepped forward and offered her hand. Marilyn shook it, but it was Casey who moved next, walking up from the back row, tightening the last bolt on the frame stand beneath the plaque, with a small wrench from her bag. Someone snapped a photo. "Still think nobody cares," Lorna whispered as she leaned in beside Marilyn. Marilyn looked around the room. A graduate student took notes in the back. A young woman in a headscarf ran her fingers across the cover of the displayed ledger. A professor held a copy of her interview transcript like scripture. She turned to Lorna and replied, "I only needed one person to." As people began to file out, Marilyn remained near the plaque. Her hand hovered near the corner, not quite touching it. Not yet. She turned to find Casey, but her granddaughter had stepped outside, phone to her ear, pacing the walkway in tight, anxious loops. Marilyn watched her through the window. She didn't like the look on Casey's face. The post went up sometime after midnight. Heather had always known how to time the algorithm. Weekday lull, soft lighting, vague caption. A photo that said just enough. This one was no different. A snapshot of the plaque outside the new room, her hand grazing the corner like it belonged to her. Proud to honor decades of public service in our family. Legacy: shot women in civic leadership. No mention of Marilyn, no tag, just the sheen of borrowed light. By morning, it had 200 likes and 3 polite comments from colleagues who wouldn't have known the truth if it walked into their office with a binder and a court seal. Marilyn didn't reply. She didn't text, didn't call, didn't correct. She packed a box. Inside, 22 indexed documents on housing reform from 1988 to 1999. Her full log of public meeting summaries from the Whitmore Bridge planning sessions, and the memo Neil had once begged her to just keep internal. At the bottom, she placed a single handwritten note on thick, cream-colored stationery. For public access. No edits, no redactions. Monsieur Rowe. The return address was typed. She sent it to the second branch of the State Library Network, across the county line, one Heather had never once mentioned on her campaign trail. It arrived 2 days later. That week, a small civics blog picked up her oral history segment and quoted her line. "The trick to civic change is watching what gets erased." Someone shared it on Reddit. A local civics instructor emailed her asking for permission to use the interview in his fall semester syllabus. Unit title: Quiet Power, The Mechanics of Accountability. A month later, a thank you letter arrived. The handwriting was neat but uneven, as if the writer had taken too long to decide each word. A young teacher, second year on the job. He had printed one of Marilyn's archived memos for his students and asked them to highlight the terms they didn't understand. They'd highlighted everything, but they'd also asked to know more. Marilyn folded the letter and placed it carefully into a binder she kept beside her desk now. The title, in her clean handwriting, read, "Still Speaking." That same morning, she went to the bank, then the county records office, then her attorney's house. whose kitchen still smelled like cinnamon candles and dust. It took less than a day to finalize everything. By the time she returned home, the new estate paperwork was signed and stamped. All physical materials, binders, handwritten notes, even her paper calendars from years past, were now under formal protection, not just personal legacy. Archival status, institutional custody, with replication rights, watermark authority, and clause-based release triggers. It meant that even if someone tried to pull the records, revise them, or recontextualize, as Heather might prefer to phrase it, there'd be a time-stamped original preserved on microfilm and a verified PDF set mirrored in 3 locations. No more erasing. She walked into her kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and opened the fridge. Lorna had left another Tupperware of pasta she hadn't asked for. She smiled faintly, closed the fridge, and left it for later. She returned to her desk. The new binder lay open to a blank page. She picked up a pen. At the top she wrote, "Media mentions, external requests. Selected, not solicited." She tapped the pen lightly against the edge of the page. Then her email pinged. Subject: Potential Speaker Opportunity, Women in Policy Series. From Events, a capitalforum.edu body. We would love to invite Ms. Rowe to speak at our fall lecture series on overlooked civic contributors whose work shaped the built environment. We understand she doesn't do on-camera interviews, but would she consider a private talk for students? Marilyn stared at the message. From the hallway, Casey's voice called softly, "Grandma?" Marilyn turned, just as Casey stepped into view, holding something behind her back. "You should see this," she said, her voice more serious than usual. She handed over a manila envelope. Not new, not from the mail. It was the one from 2005, still open. Now with something else inside it. Marilyn pulled the flap back and felt the air change. This wasn't just another memo. It was a name, and it wasn't hers. The kitchen light was low, one bulb out in the fixture above the table. Marilyn didn't replace it. The half-shadow softened the room, made it feel less like a place where things had been fought over and more like one where something real could finally settle. She sat across from Casey. A small digital recorder sat between them on a linen coaster, the red light blinking patiently. Outside, the sky had gone a heavy gray, the kind that didn't promise rain but made you expect it anyway. The envelope lay beside the recorder, its edges worn soft with time. The page inside wasn't long, just a single notarized affidavit, tucked behind a folded typewritten summary, but the name printed at the top had been enough, Niels. And under it, a second, H.J. Harmon, the same Harmon family who'd sold off town land for pennies, then turned it into the private development that became Heather's first donor stronghold. Marilyn hadn't said a word when she first read it, but now she pressed record and leaned back, eyes fixed on her granddaughter. "You should know," Marilyn said, her voice low but even, "that I could have buried this." Casey sat perfectly still. Marilyn tapped the folder once. This was signed 3 days before Heather's first public appointment. Neil, your grandfather, witnessed it. He signed off on the property transfer before the conflict of interest clause was ever ratified. It wasn't illegal, but it was calculated. Casey's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "I didn't know what it would cost you," Marilyn said. "Back then, you were still trying to love them both the same. I didn't want to be the one who made you choose." Casey nodded slowly, like someone who already had. They sat in silence, the recorder catching every breath between words. After a moment, Marilyn took a long sip of water, then set the glass down and started again. "I want to talk about the part I got wrong," she said. Casey blinked. "You?" Marilyn smiled faintly. "I kept my head down for too long. I thought documenting things was enough. But the people who shape the story aren't always the ones who write it. They're the ones who say it out loud." Casey looked at her. "Then say it." So Marilyn did. For nearly an hour she told the unspoken version. Not the archived version. Not the press-ready account. The human one. The one with the private humiliations. Times she'd been cut out of decisions, edited out of transcripts. Smiled at while being erased in real time. The compromises she'd made not out of weakness, but out of a calculated understanding of survival. She talked about Heather's rise, The moments she'd watched her daughter take shortcuts and credit in the same breath. About Neil's gift for shrugging off truth until it shrank small enough to live beside him in peace. About all the things she'd recorded and the ones she hadn't. Because sometimes naming things made them last longer than they should. When she finished, her voice was rough but steady. Casey sat with her hands clasped, knuckles white. "Someday," she said, "I'll play this for someone who needs to know. Maybe my kid, or someone else's, but someone who needs to understand how power works, how history actually happens." Marilyn blinked once, slow and full. "That's all I ever wanted," she whispered. She stood and crossed to the filing cabinet. From the bottom drawer, she pulled a narrow binder labeled Personal Archive, Family Only. She slid the recorder's memory card into a labeled sleeve, dated it, initialed it. "You get the second copy," Marilyn said, handing Casey a small flash drive. Casey took it like a relic. Then, without words, she leaned forward and hugged her grandmother, tight, anchoring. Her eyes were damp, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Marilyn hugged her back with one hand resting lightly on the back of her head. From the hallway, the grandfather clock chimed 8. Neither of them moved. Outside, the rain finally came, soft at first, like breath on glass. The walls of the lecture hall were paneled in a warm walnut that made the space feel older than it was. The seats curved in a soft semicircle toward the podium like an ear, ready to listen. Every row was filled. Marilyn stood behind the microphone without notes. Her name was printed cleanly on the digital signage behind her. Guest speaker, Marilyn Rowe. Invisible Work, Visible Cities. Women in Policy Series. She hadn't hesitated when she accepted the invitation. No disclaimers, no softening. When the introductions ended and the room hushed, she leaned forward just enough for the mic to catch the full weight of her voice. "I worked in city government for 32 years. You've never read my name in a headline, until recently, and that's because I wasn't the person standing at the podium. I was the one keeping the minutes, marking the gaps, quietly making sure things that should have stayed stood." She paused, her gaze steady as it moved over the audience. "Let me tell you what I learned while sitting just outside the frame." For 12 minutes, she walked them through the blueprint beneath every building permit, every public hearing, every policy compromise. That looked like progress from the outside and sounded like silence from within. She described how meetings got shifted last minute when developers needed votes, how women were thanked and then uninvited, how files disappeared from shelves, but not from her binders. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It landed like stone in a still pond. No preamble, no apology, just presence. When she finished, the applause came slowly at first, like the room was absorbing what had just happened before realizing it had permission to respond. Then it swelled. Not polite, not obligatory, earned. Marilyn nodded once, then stepped back. At the side of the hall, Casey stood near the center aisle, phone raised, recording every word. She didn't blink, didn't move, just captured it. Lorna sat 2 rows behind her, whispering a quiet yes as Marilyn left the podium. Neil sat near the back, not with them. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. He wore the same gray windbreaker, sat 3 seats in from the aisle, and didn't clap at first, but his eyes didn't leave Marilyn's, not once. After the crowd thinned, Amira made her way down from the recording booth, tears glinting faintly at the corners of her eyes. "That wasn't just testimony," she said. "That was anchor text." Marilyn smiled, almost shy for a second, but it passed. "You built more than policy," Amira continued. "You built proof." Casey came up behind her and placed the flash drive in Marilyn's palm. "All saved," she said. "Local, cloud, state archive upload queued." Marilyn ran a thumb over its smooth surface. "You always think you'll need someone else to speak for you," she murmured, "until the day you realize you've already said everything that matters." They walked out together, slow, quiet, side by side. The hallway lights buzzed faintly overhead. At the end of the corridor, Marilyn turned slightly, glancing back toward the hall. Her hand brushed the flash drive again. "Do you think she watched it?" she asked, not needing to say Heather's name. Casey hesitated. "I think she will." Marilyn nodded once. "Good." She stepped through the glass doors into the twilight. Waiting in her inbox, unopened, unread, was a message sent 20 minutes earlier from a private campaign email. Subject line, RE, Archive Request, Macmillan Fund Correspondence, Urgent, from H.J. Harmon. The envelope arrived by certified mail, heavy stock cream with a handwritten return address, and no accompanying letter. Just a check, $5,000, made out to Marilyn R. Rowe. Memo. In recognition of your contributions to civic documentation and public history. The foundation's name, the Harmon Institute for Civic Futures, was printed discreetly in the corner. Marilyn didn't laugh, didn't curse. She just stared at it, like the paper had been left out in the rain and someone expected her to pretend it hadn't warped. She didn't reply. She deposited it 2 days later and gave every cent away. She donated the funds to the State Archives Oral History Initiative, with one stipulation. The money had to be used exclusively for recording the stories of women in government positions whose work had never been formally recognized. Custodians of process, secretaries who tracked down missing files, planning assistants who wrote drafts that others signed. No politicians, no press darlings, just the women who'd kept the machine turning without asking for headlines. 3 weeks after the wire cleared, Amira emailed her a draft of the renaming proposal. We'd like to call it the Marilyn Drake Civic Recordings Fund, in honor of your maiden name, if that feels right. Marilyn read the line 3 times before replying. That name is fine. Don't list me as a contact. Let the stories speak first. She didn't tell Heather. She didn't tell Neil. She told Casey and Lorna over coffee, one gray afternoon when the light outside had gone slate-colored and the heater ticked like it was thinking too hard. Casey clapped once and beamed like it belonged to her, too. Lorna wiped her eye like something had just flown into it and said, "Now that's a hell of a footnote." Marilyn didn't frame the email. She printed it, folded it, and slipped it into a folder titled Indirect Impact, Quiet Gifts. No headlines, no grantsmanship, just the work moving forward. On the kitchen wall, a small magnetic calendar marked the new month with barely any appointments. Just 2 words scribbled in fine black pen on the first Monday. Quiet Winds Compound. Underneath, daily. That night, she opened a new binder, the last she planned to start. Its cover was soft black, unmarked. Inside, she placed only one thing to begin: the transcript of her public remarks from the university. She titled the first page in neat, centered script. Words They'll Never Unhear, compiled M. Rowe, final volume. She didn't need to explain it, not anymore. Later, as the house settled and the fridge hummed softly in the next room, Marilyn sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The unread message from H.J. Harmon still hovered at the top of her inbox. Subject line, Archive Request, Macmillan Fund Correspondence, Urgent. She clicked it. No salutation, no preamble. We're requesting a delay in the public release of the 2001-2004 Macmillan files on the basis of ongoing contractual obligations. We believe mutual discretion would benefit all parties and are willing to discuss terms. Please respond promptly. Marilyn leaned back in her chair. Her fingers didn't hover. They moved deliberately. She opened the archive portal, searched the Macmillan file set, and clicked Release for Access Immediate. Then she turned off the monitor and slid the binder labeled Words They'll Never Unhear just a little closer to the edge of her desk. The stage was simple. No uplights, no screens. Just a single wooden lectern and 2 standing microphones. One live, one backup. The Civic Records Conference had sent a full program weeks ago, but Marilyn hadn't looked at it. She'd only asked for 2 things: no introduction longer than 20 words, and no applause until the end, if they applauded at all. She stepped to the mic in her gray wool coat, a small black binder tucked under one arm. The same one she'd started at the kitchen table. Its edge was worn now from use, corners creased from repeated flipping. A few attendees murmured as she approached. Some recognized her name, others didn't, but would. Not because she was famous, because she was thorough. She opened the binder. No podium lights, just her voice, quiet and even. I was once told, she said, that nobody cared what I thought anymore. There was a stillness, not the awkward kind, the kind that leaned in. I believed it for a while, so I wrote instead. I documented, I indexed, I preserved. I didn't always speak, but I made sure the truth had somewhere to live. She turned a page. Legacy isn't something you're handed. It's something you index. That was all. She closed the binder and stepped away from the mic. The room stood silent for a beat. Then another, then applause. Not loud, not rushed, but steady, rising. People stood, not all at once, but they stood. She didn't stay to soak it in. She walked off stage, down the stairs, and out the side. Exit, where Casey was already waiting by the coat check with her phone in one hand and a small travel mug in the other. You didn't need notes, Casey said softly. Marilyn took the mug. I had the binder. The next day, her speech was printed in full by the American Civic Journal, under a feature titled The Indexer's Revolution. How a city clerk quietly altered the public record. By the end of the week, her scanned files, over 3 decades worth, were fully tagged and integrated into the state civic repository. A message from the lead archivist noted the access volume. Searches exceeded 30,000 in the first 48 hours. Marilyn didn't print the number. She just underlined it in her logbook and wrote one note beneath it. Proof is louder than position. That Sunday, her landline rang. She let it go to voicemail. Neil's voice came through, scratchy and slow, like someone climbing a staircase in his own mind. Marilyn, I don't know if you'll ever respond. I saw the keynote. I read the transcript. Casey sent it. I just wanted to say, you were never just our mom. You were a pillar. She saved the message, but she never called back. Instead, she went to her desk, opened the final tab in her black binder, slipped in one last document, a printed copy of the conference program, folded once and creased at the margin where her name was listed without title. Just Marilyn Rowe, Civic Contributor, Archive number 54748. She smoothed the page flat, then closed the binder. It made a soft sound, like a drawer clicking shut, like the final tab being sealed. From her kitchen window, the town moved as it always had. Quietly, imperfectly, the sidewalks still cracked in the same places. The mail truck still pulled up 2 minutes earlier than expected. Nothing dramatic, and yet everything had changed. She stood at the counter, poured the last of the coffee, and smiled to herself. Not the kind of smile for company. The kind you wear when there's no one left to convince. Then, softly, aloud, to no one at all, she said, "Nobody cares what you think anymore." A pause. Marilyn turned to the binder, slid it into its slot on the bookshelf between Still Speaking and Personal Archive. Family only. So I made sure everyone knew what I did. She exhaled once. Calm, finished. And then I did more.